Hello, hello. Now that we've done our technology thing, we're almost ready to go here.
So before we go any further, can people hear me if I just speak? Yeah. Because I don't really like to use a handheld mic. Because I'm short-sighted, so I hold things right into my face. So
Can you see though?
well, that's an interesting thing. I'll see that.
Stand over on the other side.
Yeah, there's more light over
More
here.
light over there. That's a good idea.
Let me see, I'll turn the light, see if I can turn the light on.
You should light on for now. Okay. There's a light over
Well,
here.
I just turned that light off.
But she has to be able to see.
Can you see that?
Yeah, I can see that. Yep, that's good enough.
Does that interfere with? For those of you that are new to the building, the restrooms are straight back. The men's are straight back. It looks like a closet. You turn left. And the women's is the light back there on the left. And then an exit here and an exit up the stairs. In case you need it. You panic, you know. So I would like you to introduce. I'll let Margaret Willson introduce herself, and then she can go over there. And she's got stuff on display over here on the table. And then for the members, we'll do a short meeting after her presentation. So don't go away. But the others of you, you're excused. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you. Yes, I will fill you. It's okay. Introduction to myself is I'm an anthropologist. I went to Western undergraduate and did my master's. And these are my friends from when I lived here. My brother lives here. My mother lived here. She just passed away a few years ago. My mother's husband lives here. So I'm very fond of Bellingham. I have a lot of connections. I'd probably move back right now, but time. Life doesn't allow us to do that certain times. I'm an anthropologist. Right now I suppose you want to give me a position. I'm an affiliate associate professor in the Department of Anthropology at University of Washington and also with the Canadian Studies Center, even though I have never published anything in Canada, in their Arctic program. So they invited me to come in. I pointed out that I hadn't published anything in Canada, but they said, well, that's all right. You can do some field trips with us, and you can start doing it. And I thought, oh, that's good. I love the Canadian Studies Department. So I've been doing research in Iceland for a few years, and I'm delighted to be invited here. And I'll start out just by, it's about Seawomen, so I'll start out, I'm not of Icelandic descent or Norwegian descent. And so people always ask me, why did I ever get involved in this? So I read a section of the book to explain that. And it also gives you an idea of how the book sounds like. This is a book thing off the part of the book. So, okay. So we'll see if I can see this. Okay. The year I first encountered Iceland was 1999. And Iceland Air was trying, again, to promote direct flights from Seattle to Reykjavik. The flights were surprisingly cheap. I didn't have much money, but I had time and a reason to go. My Icelandic friend Disa had received a grant to work on a scientific study in her native Iceland, and she'd invited me to visit her. Disa, who had shared my home in Seattle for some months, now said she had an apartment in Reykjavik with an extra bedroom. Well, why not, I thought. And with that dangerous thought in mind, I booked a ticket. Why do such impulsive decisions so often become life-changing? Perhaps because they are out of the ordinary. By allowing ourselves to step away from the conventional, we have already made ourselves more open. Experiencing something completely new jolts us into noticing the layered meanings of small happenings. At these times, our increased attention transforms the superficially mundane. And so it would be with this trip to Iceland. Like so many visitors to Iceland before and after me, I fell in love. In Seattle, I wait for the intensity of color that comes during those long summer twilights when the sun rides close to the horizon. At this time, shadows seem solid. The very air changes, feeling almost fluid. In Iceland, this kind of light comes whenever the sun shines. That May, I experienced 3 a.m. conversations where late loses its meaning as seemingly endless twilight moves between strands of amber rose to magenta, the shadows etched in cobalt. Then, at some point, almost unnoticed, the twilight shifts not to dark, but to the solid light of a new day. I was learning that the definition of night is malleable. Disa wanted to show me her country, so one sunny, cold, and windy day, we drove out to the small coastal community of Stokkseyri. In this Iceland, before the country's 2008 economic crash, while Reykjavik celebrated in frenetic, if somewhat innocent opulence, unaware of impending economic disaster, Stokkseyri seemed a bit lost. A few scattered modern buildings stood isolated in the grass. A large box-like building at the center of town, previously a fish factory, seemed abandoned, with only 2 small tourist shops inhabiting its huge echoing interior. I wondered how often actual tourists found the place. Along the water's edge ran a low stone wall, which allowed you a view of the sea, but not of the rocky shore. Disa told me that the sea had flooded this town several times. Young yellow grasses and courageous early flowers swept toward the horizon in all directions. When I mentioned how deserted the town felt, Disa said, "Iceland is a place of very old communities, and what you see is Stokkseyri's survival. In 1403, smallpox killed off half the people of this country. Another 25% died in a plague of 1707. Then, with the ash clouds from the volcanic eruptions of 1783, arrived a year when summer never came. 80% of the sheep and cattle, 80% of the sheep and over half of the horses and cattle died from starvation and fluoride poisoning. It was a hungry spring, with nothing to eat. A quarter of Iceland's population died that year. She looked at the stone wall where a solitary raven now stood. It was a ghost spring. We wandered the empty streets and found among the yellow houses a windowless stone hovel, its low sod roof and surrounding grassy stone wall in distinct disrepair. "What's that?" I asked. "Here's a sign," Disa said. She walked over to the small stone plaque and began translating the Icelandic. "This is a reconstruction of the winter fishing hut of Þuríður Einarsdóttir, one of Iceland's greatest fishing captains. She lived from 1777 to 1863, rode from Stokkseyri, and was acclaimed for both bringing in the largest catches and for never losing a single crew member in the 60 years she fished." "Wait," I said, "she? This renowned fishing captain was a woman?" I felt a quiet chill that then spread along my arms to my fingers. I knew I was in the presence of a remarkable story. "Yes, my grandmother used to tell us stories about her." "Wow," I paused. "And what about today? Are there lots of fisherwomen in Iceland today?" "I don't know," Disa said. "I've never heard of any." And with that began what became a mystery and a quest. I worked at sea myself when I was in my early 20s, late teens and early 20s. And it seemed to me that if I could work as a deckhand at sea, and I did it in the Northwest here, and in Australia, and in the South Pacific, if I could do it, Iceland has a reputation as the greatest gender equality in the world. Surely women work at sea in Iceland. And yet, when I started looking around, what everybody said is there weren't any, and there were none in the history either. So, time went by, I had another job. But eventually I was able to go back because I was always curious. There was something, didn't quite work on this. And I was able to get a grant, and I hired a research assistant, and we started to go through all these documents, all this history. We combed through the history. Now, one of the things that's wonderful about Iceland, if you're doing research, is, which many of you may know, is that it has an incredible history of literacy. From their saga, which is still some of the most remarkable literature known to the world, from that time on, almost everybody could read at least enough to read religious texts. They had one of the earliest printing presses, went from Europe to Iceland in the 1500s. And Icelanders have told me again and again, well, first I have to say that they lost their independence in 1245, and they didn't get it back until 1945, so there were 700 years where they were a completely impoverished colony of Denmark with a huge amount of starvation, and they were living in very, very dire circumstances. Incredible poverty. And what Icelanders have told me again and again and again is we may not have had food to eat, but everyone had at least one book in a household. And that is a remarkable tradition. And you have this group of they were farmers. But what they did is they started writing things down. They copied the sagas, because the printing press was reserved really for these religious texts. And so to save the sagas, they started copying them on sheepskin, on whatever they could get, and they started doing poetry and writing it down. To be a poet in Iceland is still one of the highest professions you can have, to be a scholar. And they still write poetry for a funeral, for a celebration, for a ribbon cutting, for anything. They'll do a poem still today. So they would write it down, and then these people, these farmers, and it was almost always entirely men, but they would go around and they started interviewing all their neighbors and their family and everybody. And they started writing down oral history, basically. And if those men thought that women were worth talking about, which luckily a decent number did, then we have a written history of day-to-day life of women, of the common people, which you have in almost no other country. It's remarkable. Because of they did these, and it was just like, they'd write it down at the time. When we started going through all these old books and documents, you could find verbatim the women saying, I did this, and this is what it was like. So you had women telling what it was like to go to sea in the 1600s, in the 1700s, and in the 1800s. It was amazing. We found, going through this, accounts of not just dozens, not hundreds, but thousands of women. With corroboration from these people and what people said, being conservative, I can say with complete confidence that a full third of the Icelandic fishing fleet during these decades, or these centuries, were women. They were captains, they were helmsmen, they were renowned for their weather reading, they were sealers, they fished pregnant. There are stories of some of them giving birth, without the boat, being pregnant, getting into labor, just barely making it. They rowed, they were very strong, they were renowned for their strength. It was so common that also when you see the death records, huge number of the people dying in the boats were women. It was so accepted. Basically, we keep talking about them in anthropology or places, you talk about the sea is a male space because it's only men who do this kind of stuff. It's not true. For these centuries in Iceland, it was not. Women were expected to be on sea completely as much as men. And they were not even mentioned unless they did something else remarkable, because going to sea wasn't remarkable at all. So they had to be in trouble to have court cases against them, be renowned for some reason. Thorreinisdóttir, the one with the reconstructed fishing hut, she was renowned because she was so clever. She was an amazing, she was an incredible sea captain in the rowboats, and she was so good at reading weather that all the other boats in the area would end up following her. If the weather was not so great, she could go out. When others were afraid to go out, she would go out and would always get better. She was fantastic at reading weather. And there were times when it didn't look so bad and she just went for shore. One of the early times that happened, some other boats were out still, and tragically enough, a big storm came up very quickly, and they had a very hard time getting in, and one of the boats turned right near the shore, and all the people dry and people could see her. After that, everybody in that area followed her. They would just, if she went in, they go, whoops, I guess we're pulling up, we're going in. And if she went out and it looked bad, they go, oh, she's going to get 2 runs today because it's going to get better if she's going out. But also, she had observational skills of Sherlock Holmes. A remarkable person, and she became a detective. This is true. In the 1700s and 1800s, she became a detective. And the colonial authorities made her work for them, even when she didn't want to. And she would solve these crimes by these, and they're all recorded. And she helped people all over the place. She also went to court a lot on behalf of women who were being abused by their husbands. She went to court if anybody harassed her at all. She wore trousers, which was against the law, but she did anyway. And if somebody said, one guy, he said, when she was older, she was about 80, she was still running up and down the hills chasing sheep. And one of her neighbors said, I'd like to see what's under those trousers. And the term used in Icelandic is a rude term. It basically means two tools. That means, and she said, you can just look underneath if you like. And she promptly sued him for harassment and won. And the pastor made him meekly apologize. So, this was when she was 80. And she did it all her life. If anybody said anything, she just sued them, and she always won. So she's quite renowned. It's quite amazing, all the information about her. In fact, my next book is going to be about her. Maybe next year, first to know. So, but then there's, for instance, another woman who's also in the 1700s who was renowned for her poetry. Beautiful, beautiful poetry, which we've translated. Disa, the person I call Disa in the book, she and I have translated some. We have quite a bit of poetry in the book, which we took ages to translate, because we tried to get some of the rhyming and feeling of the Icelandic. The Icelandic is better, but whatever. This is this woman who's called Laufeyrir. She was a very, very strong rower and renowned for being good at sea. Here's one she wrote while they were out in a storm, which amazingly, these poems have been preserved. So here's the one while she's out in a storm. I beg of the blood-haired waves, whose frothing veils harass. Haughty sea goddess daughters, please will you spare my ass? The ass is a direct translation. We worked back from that. Everything was going to rhyme with ass. I was just going to tell you, I wasn't going to get rid of that. 1700s, I write it, it's going on. So here's another one. The thing is, you were rowing these boats, and if the person next to you couldn't row as well as you could, it meant you did more work, because we had the boat unbalanced. So that was, people got irritated if somebody couldn't row as well. And she was apparently a very strong rower, by all reports, and here's another poem she made for the amusement of her fellow crew, except for presumably the hapless object of this particular poem. Okay. Do row better, my dear man. Fear not to hurt the ocean. Use your shoulders if you can. The sea will heal despite your motion. And she she wrote tons of poetry, just beautiful, beautiful poetry, and she was known for that. I